If anyone at the Cincinnati Open thought putting Alex Eala on a smaller court would somehow keep the spotlight under control, they got a reality check almost immediately. Instead of quietly blending into the schedule, Eala turned one of the tournament's secondary courts into one of the hottest tickets on the grounds. Fans packed in shoulder to shoulder, Filipino flags appeared everywhere, and suddenly a scheduling decision that looked routine on paper started looking like the kind of mistake tournament organizers should have seen coming from a mile away. And that's what makes this story so wild. Cincinnati had already been given the blueprint. Used days earlier, the tennis world watched the same thing happen in Toronto. Eala had arrived there carrying serious momentum after a breakthrough run in Washington, where she captured her first WTA title and pushed herself into the world's top 20. According to the source, she became the first Filipino player, male or female, to win a tour-level singles title, and she did it by going through an absolutely brutal list of opponents. Her Washington run included Queen Bin Singh, Leylah Fernandez, Elina Svitolina, Naomi Osaka, and Jessica Pegula in the final. That is not the kind of draw where a player sneaks through unnoticed. Eala had to beat established champions and major names one after another, and when she finally reached Pegula, she finished the job in 3 sets after a long rain interruption stretched the final across 2 days. That title didn't just give Eala another trophy for the shelf. It changed the way the tennis world looked at her. Her ranking climbed to a career-high number 20. Her prize money moved beyond the 1.5 million mark, according to the source, and her fan support began turning into something tournaments could literally measure in ticket demand. Toronto found that out the hard way. When Eala's match was initially placed on a smaller court, the response was immediate. The source says a session at Sobeys Stadium sold out within about 30 minutes, with demand climbing well beyond what the smaller venue could physically accommodate. Tournament director Carl Hale later spoke openly about just how unusual the reaction had been. The stands were packed with Filipino supporters. Flags filled the venue. Chants echoed around the grounds. The tournament even leaned into the cultural moment by offering chicken adobo, and the atmosphere became one of the defining stories of the event. This wasn't just a player drawing a nice crowd. This was a player changing the entire feel of a tournament. And yet, after watching all of that happen in Canada, Cincinnati still reportedly placed Eala on a secondary court. On paper, you could understand the thinking. Tournament scheduling has traditionally leaned heavily on rankings, established star power, matchups, and historical ticket demand. A player ranked around number 20 might not automatically receive prime stadium placement every time. But that's exactly where the old model started breaking down. Eala was no longer functioning like a normal number 20 player. Her ranking told only part of the story. The other part was the audience following her. Toronto should have made that obvious. The source points to Canada's large Filipino community, particularly around the Greater Toronto area, as one reason demand there became so intense. But the same basic dynamic exists in the United States, where millions of people of Filipino heritage live across the country. That meant Eala's support wasn't going to disappear just because the tour crossed the border. And Cincinnati quickly learned that lesson. Fans who had followed her through Washington and Toronto were already paying attention. Some had watched her breakthrough season unfold match by match. Others were drawn in by national pride. Some were simply fascinated by a player who kept beating bigger names and climbing faster than anyone expected. Whatever the reason, the demand was real. That's what makes Cincinnati's initial scheduling decision so hard to understand. The tournament wasn't dealing with an unknown player anymore. Eala had already provided enough evidence that she could move tickets. Her results backed it up too. Earlier in the season, her ranking had climbed dramatically. She reached the quarterfinals in Baden-Württemberg on grass. The source also highlights her Wimbledon upset of Iga Swiatek. Then came Washington, where she won her first WTA title. In Toronto, she followed that championship by defeating Alicia Parks, the same opponent who had beaten her earlier at the Australian Open. That rematch carried its own story. Eala took control, handled Parks, power, and once again had a packed crowd behind her. One player described seeing a practice court completely full before Eala had even arrived, only to realize what was happening after spotting the Filipino flags. That is the kind of moment tournament officials notice. Or at least, they should. Even Eala's opponents were starting to recognize the scale of her support. Jessica Pagula praised the Filipino fans after Washington. Coco Gauff spoke positively about the new audience Eala was bringing to tennis. And the broader conversation around the sport started shifting from is Alex Eala becoming a star, to how big can this actually get? Andy Roddick also weighed in on the phenomenon, making the broader point that when fans are organizing major watch parties back home just to see a player compete, you're dealing with something much bigger than ranking points. That's the key here. Tennis schedules have always been built around certain assumptions. The biggest names get the biggest courts. Higher-ranked players usually get priority. Recent champions get more attention. But Eala's rise has exposed a blind spot in that system. She represents a market tennis has barely had access to before. The Philippines has a population of roughly 100 million people, and the Filipino diaspora across North America is huge. When a player from that background suddenly reaches the top 20, wins titles, beats elite opponents, and becomes a symbol of national pride, standard scheduling models can fall apart fast. Because a ranking number cannot measure emotional investment. It cannot measure how many families are planning their day around one match. It cannot measure how many Filipino fans are willing to drive hours to see one player. It cannot measure how quickly word spreads through a community when someone from that community is doing something historic. Toronto learned that first. Cincinnati then proved Toronto was not a one-off. And that's why the story matters beyond one court assignment. This is really about whether tennis tournaments can adapt quickly enough when a new kind of star emerges. Eala's rise happened so fast that organizations relying on last month's assumptions were already behind. Between January and August, the source says her ranking climbed from the low 40s to number 20. That is a massive shift in a short period of time. Add a WTA title, huge wins, sold-out sessions, and a rapidly expanding international fan base, and suddenly you have a player whose commercial pull is moving faster than the infrastructure around her. That's exactly what happened in Cincinnati. The tournament had the Toronto example sitting right in front of it. It had the Washington Championship. It had the rankings surge. It had media attention. It had clear signs that Eala's matches were becoming destination events. And still, the first instinct was apparently to treat her like a standard player in the 20 to 30 ranking range. The fans answered that decision immediately. They showed up. They filled the available space. They made the smaller court feel even smaller. And once again, tournament officials were forced to confront the reality that the Eala effect was not going away. Now all eyes shift toward an even bigger stage. The US Open. New York has the infrastructure Cincinnati and Toronto could only dream of. It has massive courts, enormous crowds, global media attention, and one of the most diverse fan bases anywhere in sports. That also means the stakes are higher. If Eala's support keeps growing at the same pace, the US Open may face the same question Toronto and Cincinnati already answered too late. Do you wait for the demand to overwhelm a smaller venue, or do you recognize the trend early and give the player a court that matches the audience? Because say after Washington, Toronto, and Cincinnati, nobody can really say they were surprised anymore. Eala has become one of the most compelling stories of the North American hardcourt season. She won her first title by beating elite opponents. She climbed into the top 20. She generated extraordinary ticket demand. She energized Filipino communities across multiple cities. And she forced tournaments to reconsider what star power actually looks like in modern tennis. Maybe that is the biggest takeaway of all. For years, tennis measured stars by trophies, rankings, endorsements, and Grand Slam history. Alex Eala is showing that there is another factor now, community. A player can bring an entire new audience with her. And when that audience shows up in person, buys tickets, fills courts, waves flags, and turns an ordinary session into one of the loudest moments of the tournament, organizers have to adjust. Toronto learned it. Cincinnati learned it. Now the US Open is next. And if the past few weeks have shown us anything, underestimating Alex Eala's drawing power may have become one of the easiest mistakes in tennis to predict.